What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Sorcerer DPS. So you guys might have heard me mention this a few times already in prior build videos, but for this particular patch not much has changed for Magicka DPS, or in all builds in general really. A few sets released, well, at least one of them is particularly potentially good for Magicka DPS, but in terms of balance, not much has changed. So this build video is going to be very similar to the one that was released for the Dragonhold DLC. So, like the rest of our DPS build videos, we won't be going over any sort of gear. Instead, this video will be focusing in on skills as well as the rotation itself. So if you're interested in knowing what gear I am running, there is a link up in the upper left hand corner of, or no, upper right hand corner of the screen that should be coming up right around now. You can go ahead and click that to check out the gear that you can run as a Magicka Sorcerer. There's no real any sort of variations here for Magicka Sorcerer. Everything you see in that video can be used here on a Magicka Sorcerer. Now, you will also notice that this is a pet build. There will be a non-pet build coming out as well over the next few days. So be on the lookout for that as well. I just didn't have time to record a non-pet build in time for the scheduled release for the Max Work video. So for those of you guys who don't want to run pets, then just wait for that non-pet video to come out. But let's go ahead and get started here with our skills. Before the pet build, we are running Crystal Frags, Elemental Weapon. This is because we do have access to the Sigil Order line. If you don't have access to the Sigil Order line, then instead you'll be running Force Pulse instead of Elemental Weapon. Then we have Twilight Tormentor, so I am running the Tormentor here. However, you can go with the other morph of the Tormentor, which is the Twilight Matriarch, if you want a heal instead. Tormentor will end up doing more damage than the Matriarch, but the Matriarch does have a heal ability, which might make it more beneficial in progression groups or where you feel like the heal will be more important than the additional damage. In general, you won't actually be activating the Twilight Tormentor's ability too often, so Matriarch might be a better option for that safety net of that heal. Then we have Haunting Curse. Despite the fact that this is a pet build, they did nerf Daedric Prey last patch, so it doesn't do quite as much additional damage. Your pets don't do quite as much additional damage anymore while it's active, and so Haunting Curse actually ends up being a little bit stronger overall compared to Daedric Prey. They're a little bit similar, but Haunting Curse does edge out Daedric Prey a little bit here. Plus, you can run Haunting Curse on a non-pet build without any sort of DPS loss versus Daedric Prey, which you will eat that sustain loss because you have to cast Daedric Prey more often on a non-pet build. Then we have Bound Aegis for the additional max Magicka. You can also run Inner Light instead. The difference is only a 1% in your max Magicka, so not that big of a difference. But in terms of min-maxing your max Magicka, Bound Aegis is better than Inner Light. And we have Greater Storm Atronach. Then for our back bar, we have Mystic Orb, Unstable Wall of Fire. We have to double bar our pet. We have Barbed Trap, and then we have Spell Symmetry. This is only for the Parse. In a real raid environment, you will be getting more sustain benefits than you are getting from the trial dummy. So you'll be getting things like Symphony of Blades, you'll have Hollow Fang, Worm perhaps, Sentinel of Grugams. You have a bunch of different sources of sustain in an actual raid that we're not replicating here. So we are using Spell Symmetry to fully sustain our rotation. In an actual raid, you can replace this with any number of abilities, something like Bound Aegis or Inner Light for more max Magicka. You can use something like Lightning Flood if you're the only Sorkin group for the Conduit synergy for your tank's Alkosh. You can run something like Soul Trap, Consuming Soul Trap for more sustain, and so on. So you do have a few options when it comes to replacing this particular ability here. Then we have Greater Storm Atronach again. Now you can run Shooting Star instead of Greater Storm Atro if you'd like, but Greater Storm Atro will give you more return because it will give you 2% additional spell damage, which is a little bit better than the 2% max Magicka that Shooting Star provides. So just keep that in mind there if you can pick whichever one you prefer to have on hand. But that pretty much covers it for all the skills. Going over our rotation next. Rotation is pretty straightforward, a little bit dynamic, so just bear that in mind here because we will be kind of basing this off the fact that Haunting Curse doesn't last quite as long as our other dots, so it lasts for 12 seconds compared to Mystic Orb and Unstable, which lasts for 10 seconds. If you're running Lightning Flood, that also lasts for 10 seconds. And then you have Barbed Trap, which lasts for 18 seconds, so a little bit to offset here with your dots. But generally speaking, the general idea is to try to maintain your dots and then use Elemental Weapon, your spammable, whenever you have downtime on your dots, and then Crystal Frags when it procs. So kind of a better way to show you guys would be to just show you on this 3 million dummy. So as soon as your Crystal Frag procs, you're going to want to use it right away, like I am here, and beyond that, it's just keeping an eye on your dots. And then recasting your dots once they have expired. So I mentioned that you all do want to use Crystal Frags pretty much as soon as it procs. And that's because, actually let's go ahead and reset the dummy so we're not sitting here hitting this dummy here with our pet. And that's because when you have the Crystal Frag proc, it doesn't stack. You can't save a proc. So if you use Elemental Weapon or Force Pulse and you get a Crystal Frag proc and you don't use it right away, your next Force Pulse or whatever ability that you end up using might end up basically re-procking Crystal Frags. So that one proc that you had from the first Elemental Weapon cast is now overridden by the second Elemental cast. So basically you just wasted that proc that you got from the first Elemental Weapon cast. So right when you get your Crystal Frag procs, make sure to use it pretty much right away before you use any other ability on your front bar that uses Magicka. So that would include Elemental Weapon, Haunting Curse, your Twilight Tormentor if you're running that. So make sure to use that frag proc right away. Now you will also notice that we're not using our execute ability, so when we get into execute, nothing really has to change too much. We're still going to be using our spammable of Elemental Weapon and Crystal Frags when we get it to proc. Now if you are in a group where sustain's not quite as strong and you do need to end up running Spell Sim, be very mindful of when you use Spell Symmetry because it does eat your health. So just be mindful of when you activate it so that way you don't use it when a boss does like an arena-wide AoE or when you anticipate taking damage. That is a surefire way to get some frustration both from you and your raid lead because now you probably are dead. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and do our 21 million dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the DPS that a Magicka Sorcerer can pull compared to other classes. Now, do keep in mind this is a trial dummy. We are not getting... This is not representative of a trial's parse. Obviously, in a trial, we have mechanics going on, but also in a trial, we have different sources of debuffs and buffs as well. So, for example, here, we're missing things like Major Vulnerability from Necromancers. We are missing debuffs like Zens and Martial Knowledge. We're also missing buffs as well, meaning sustained buffs, things like Symphony of Blades, for example. Hollow Fang is another set that we are missing here. We do get Worm from the trial dummy, but Hollow Fang is better for sustain overall. We're missing things like the Master Restoration Staff, unique bonus. So our sustain is going to end up being a little bit low compared to in an actual raid. Yes, we are getting synergies, but at the same time, that's not really indicative of what your sustain actually will be like. We try to mimic it a little bit by running Ghastly Eyeball, but that's, again, doesn't quite meet the usual sustain that you would see in an actual raid environment. So with all that in mind, we're going to go ahead and do our parse. And again, this is just for comparison purposes to other Magicka DPS builds that I have on my channel. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I am going to be activating the Tormentor's special ability up until we hit 50% health, at which point we don't need to run the ability any longer because it will no longer work. Now because the ability does use Magicka, it is more beneficial to cast it on the front bar rather than your back bar, even though you do have the option to cast it on the back bar. See here, before I cast any other ability, I do get rid of my frag proc first. You can use a Storm Atro while sitting on a frag proc because that's considered an ultimate and doesn't use Magicka, so you're fine to do that. But something like that, which I just did, which was I cast Haunting Curse before I use my frag proc, you want to avoid doing that. Your sustain is going to vary depending on how lucky you are with frag procs. So like right now I'm on a dry streak, so my sustain is taking a hit because we're not getting as many frag procs to help out our sustain. Now when you use your ultimate, be mindful of where you're placing it. You do want to place it somewhere within range of your allies, so that way they can pick up the Major Berserk synergy. So at this point, that was the last activation that we're going to have of our Tormentor, because now we're below 50%, and so the special ability won't work anymore. Again, you don't have to use a Tormentor, you can run the Matriarch instead for the heal. You will notice that our DPS is slowly going down as the Parse continues, and that's just because of the Sorc passive. We have sort of a reversed execute under the Sorc passive, so your DPS will naturally start to go lower as the fight goes on. It will jump up again towards the end because we are using Bloodthirsty. But until you hit 25%, your DPS is going to slowly go down as the Sorc passive, does its thing. Again, we're not using the Sorc execute, so there's no need to change anything at all about a rotation. And there we go, that is the full Sorc rotation there. So in terms of DPS, we pulled 83.4k, so not bad. The main thing that's pulling Sorcs back really is their sustain. So if we go ahead and take a look at our sustain here, resources, Magicka, we're not quite hitting 0. We're trying really hard not to hit 0, because obviously that means we'd have to heavy attack and then use balance or spell sim, but it is definitely dipping fairly low. You can see we're below 50% for a large majority of the fight here. So that's one of the big things with Sorcs. For longer fights, this is not really representative of all fights that you'll find in endgame PvE content, but it is somewhat representative of longer period fights. For those fights, you are going to struggle with sustain a little bit here, so just keep that in mind. That's one of the biggest weaknesses of Mag Sorcs. Your sustain's not quite as good as other classes like Magicka Nightblades or Magicka DKs that are running the Asylum staff. Well, that concludes this build video. Hope you guys found this informative. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about the build, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.